Title: Nero Wolfe and the Bell That Wouldn't Stop. A Nero Wolfe story. If you've never heard our door buzzer go off for 6 minutes straight, you've led a charmed life, and I envy you. It isn't musical. It doesn't plead. It drills. Somewhere back when they built brownstones to last and men to answer doors, a sadist selected our front bell, and every time somebody leans into it, I wonder what the man's other hobbies were. I've handled toddlers with tin whistles who were easier on a man's hearing. On that particular Tuesday at 3:10, the buzzer started its operation like a dentist who bills by the hour. Fritz was in the kitchen reducing something French to submission. Wolfe was in the office chair pretending his book of Herodotus was worth rereading, and I was at my desk trying to decide if a paperclip could be bent into a metaphor for my day. The first 10 seconds of the buzzer got me on my feet. The next 30 made me regret the benefits of circulation. "Archie," Wolfe said without looking up. He could put a whole paragraph into my name. This one read, "Stop that racket, or I will relocate to Montenegro and leave you my orchids as a consolation prize." "I'm on it," I told him and headed for the hall. When I cracked the door, I met a pair of eyes that belonged to someone who didn't trust gods, laws, or doorstops. They were grey with a black ring, and they came as part of a package. Late 30s, raincoat that had met rain, hat that had met wind, and a mouth that did its own thinking. She was pushing the button with a gloved thumb like a commuter punching a broken elevator panel. She didn't stop when she saw me. She pushed twice more, like punctuation. "You don't make friends that way," I suggested. "I don't require friends," she said. The voice was low and held steady like a tightrope. "I require Mr. Wolfe." "I'll allow you to require him. He rarely acknowledges a requirement without an argument. Do you always keep your thumb on a man's doorbell until he melts?" She took the thumb off. It wouldn't stop. "That," I said, "was you." "No, my bell, my office bell, my apartment bell last night. It's a beginning. You may choose where." She tilted her head a fraction. "Are you Archie Goodwin?" I nodded. "That's the rumor." "Then tell Mr. Wolfe that the woman who made his bell behave the way hers has been behaving for 2 weeks is here to hire him. And if he'd like a demonstration again, I'm happy to oblige." She had the kind of poise that made threats sound like seminar topics. I stepped aside and let her in. In the office, Wolfe permitted her to enter his atmosphere as he permits anyone, by the cubic inch. He didn't stand, a thing he reserves for wars and the occasional opera. But he moved a finger in the direction of the red leather chair and let gravity and society do the rest. I took her coat and hat and had a sense they preferred her shoulders. "You have practiced your entrance," Wolfe said, and closed Herodotus with care, as if the Greeks might complain. The bell was offensive. "That's the point," she said, taking the chair and crossing one leg over the other with a click of heel that mapped coordinates. "Mr. Wolfe, I'm Margot Kincaid." "Kincaid," Wolfe repeated. He inhaled in a way that told me he was collecting information she didn't mean to bring. Soap, rain, the faint metal smell some offices wear. "What is your trade, Miss Kincaid?" "I'm the executive secretary and operations manager for the Carillon Trust." She looked at me to see if I was impressed. She didn't need to check Wolfe. He doesn't do impressed. We maintain, preserve, and, when donors remember the dead more fondly than the living, restore bells. Tower bells, handbells, chimes, carillons. We run concerts. We keep bells ringing properly in churches that can't afford the engineers they require. We're a very small, very noisy charity. "And your bell will not stop," Wolfe said. "Why is that my concern?" "Because it's not a mechanical failure," she said. "It's a siege. Someone has found a way to make our internal signaling bells, at the Trust and more recently at my apartment, ring incessantly. At first it was random. Now there are times, patterns. I wake at 3:17 every night to a bell that shouldn't have power at that hour. I've had electricians in, I've had the landlord in, I've swapped out the units, The ringing continues, and messages arrive that reference it. If I miss a ring, I get an envelope at the office with a copy of yesterday's donor ledger and a red circle. Twice they've anticipated meetings I hadn't scheduled when the envelopes were stamped. Wolfe contracted his lips. Messages. In the beginning, anonymous notes. Attend to your peel, Mistress Kincaid. Then details about internal business. Recently, suggestions for which donors to cultivate and which to ignore. The suggestions align with a particular board member's preferences, but that board member is not clever enough to do this, and I'm too stubborn to be lectured at 2 a.m. by a desk bell with delusions of grandeur. I settled on the arm of the red chair by Wolfe's desk because it's my perch and I'm attached to it. Why us? Because you stake your home on control. She glanced around the office the way a doctor looks at a man and diagnoses gout. Everything in this house has a place and an hour, and nothing invades without permission. I thought if anyone would understand the violation of a bell that won't stop, it would be Mr. Wolfe. Her eyes cut to me. And because when a woman not in distress claims to be, the police are more interested in her tone than in her cause. Wolfe's eyebrows shifted 0.5 millimeter, which is like another man standing up and clapping. You're not in distress? I'm furious, she said, and I'm tired of being handled by sound. Phooey, Wolfe said, which was approbation disguised as disdain. Who are the persons with access to your systems? The Carillon Trust is 5 staff and a board. Staff, myself, our artistic director, Alan Brome, a program coordinator, Lucy Waugh, a maintenance chief, Dennis Pike, and a part-time accountant, Mr. Havel. The board is 7, a bishop who wants to be a banker who wants to be a poet, a lawyer who is what he is, and 4 donors who love the idea of bells more than they tolerate their noise. The building has 1 super who thinks locks are insults and electricity is a rumor. And your apartment? 2 rooms on 9th. Old buzzer, old wiring, 1 cat, and a neighbor who teaches oboe. She paused. I know how that sounds. It sounds like Manhattan, I said. How long has this been going? 2 weeks since the first odd ring. 10 days since it became a pattern. 5 days since the messages shifted from coy to prescriptive. Last night was the first at my apartment. Today I decided to test Mr. Wolfe's patience and your buzzer. She met Wolfe's gaze. I didn't enjoy doing it. It felt cheap. But you returned my call only to say you weren't taking clients this week. He had, bless his routine and his urge to protect it. The orchid schedule had been heavy and the weather was wrong for strangers. Wolfe hates weather he hasn't ordered. I said, Wolfe corrected gently, that I was not disposed to take clients this week. He turned a palm up, fat and magnificent. Your visit was an imposition. It has saved you a day. I'll take the result, she said. Wolfe shifted his glance to me. I got my notebook because when he looks at me that way, he's about to look at himself and pretend he didn't. You have 3 matters, he told her. First, the mechanics, the means by which these signals are produced outside authorized times. Second, the information, the source and vector by which your internal schedules and preferences are known to an intruder. Third, the purpose, why someone would exert this effort against an institution whose principal offense is melodious noise. Our principal offense, she said, is the control of public ritual. People who hate that always hate us. People who love it want to own us. That is a passable formulation. Wolfe folded his hands, which is his version of calling the room to attention. You have sought the police? I spoke to a friend in the precinct. He told me to change my locks, my diet, and my job, in that order. She didn't blink. He offered to send a man to sleep on my couch for a week at the city's expense if I was afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm insulted. Then you require a private remedy, Wolfe said. Archie, present, said, you will accompany Miss Kincaid to the Carillon Trust and to her apartment. You will observe the devices, the wiring, the placement, and the function. You will speak to her staff and, if possible, to one or two of the board members whose preferences have been reflected in the messages. You will not touch a wire. You will not touch a cat. You will take copious notes. I live to serve, I told him. Miss Kincaid, do you prefer to walk into a hornet's nest first or let them sting from a distance? We'll go to the office, she said. She rose, and the air pressure in the room acknowledged it. The apartment can wait until I decide whether I'm sleeping there tonight. Fees, Wolfe said, like a man remembering that civilization runs on them. He named one. It would restore a modest bell tower. She didn't flinch. Half now. Half when I can sleep without a ring telling me when to breathe. Wolfe grunted. His eyes were on the small bronze hotel bell that sits on the corner of my desk. It's decorative, a souvenir a client with uneven taste gave us last year. He's glanced at it before, usually when contemplating the nature of civilization and the role of small, needless objects in the downfall of men. This time he stretched one finger and tapped it once. The clean, lonesome note landed in the room and hung there like a thread. Miss Kincaid, he said, do you know the difference between a bell and a whistle? Yes, she said, wary. A whistle commands. A bell convenes. He flicked another small note into the air. Your assailant is a whistler pretending to be a bell. I dislike that. She looked at him as if he'd just pledged a crusade. I thought you might. We handled the retainer, and I went for her hat and coat. She watched me as if the hat rack might offer an argument. When we were at the door, she turned. Mr. Wolfe, will you, please, refrain from ringing your own bell while I'm in your employ? I have no impulse to, he said. Archie's contrivances are more than sufficient. I opened the door and she stepped out. The afternoon had decided on the thin cold that looks good on paper and bad on the airs. On the stoop, she paused and pulled her gloves tight as if cinching herself to a cause. Obligatory question, I said as we headed down the steps. Who hates you enough to schedule your sleep? Everyone who has ever tried to schedule me, she said. But in this case, 4 parties would benefit from my surrender. Alan Brome, artistic director, dislikes my control over the calendar. Dennis Pike, maintenance chief, dislikes that I sign his purchase orders. Rosalind Venner, board vice chair, dislikes that I say no to her pet projects. And a donor named Tolland, shipping magnate, dislikes that I have ethics he can't invoice. That's a start, I said. The cab I flagged was the color of a compromise. We climbed in and I gave the driver the trust's address on West 53rd. She stared out at the city, which was doing its act with scaffolds and steam. This is going to sound like a melodrama, she said. I'm not a melodramatist. I schedule other people's melodramas for Saturday afternoons, 2 o'clock. Try me, I said. There is one more party, she said. Someone who doesn't benefit in any obvious way. A man who was fired 6 months ago for selling access to our rehearsal schedule. He wasn't clever, he was sloppy, but he knew where all the bells were. He wired half of them. Name? Peter Ness, she said. He cried at his dismissal and asked if he could come hear the bells one last time. I told him no. I also told him I would send him his final check by mail. That was kind, I said. It was policy, she said. Kindness is what they call it when a woman follows policy and a man objects. We turned east, and the driver took a lane because it was available. She glanced at me, then at my hands. What? I asked. You didn't flinch when I rang your bell for 6 minutes, she said. Most men flinch. Most men take newspapers personally, I said. I take bells under advisement. For the record, that stunt isn't recommended. Mr. Wolfe is particular about the sanctity of his habitat. So am I, she said. That's why I'm here. By the time we hit the block with the trust's building, I had the shape of it. A tidy siege from inside the walls. Bells weaponized as grammar. People who like the sound of their own preferences amplified. The Caroline Trust sat in one of those post-war boxes that acts like a gentleman at a dance, polite, recessed, a little dull. Over the doorway, someone with a budget had hung a brass plaque with raised letters, the Caroline Trust, and below, smaller, for the public harmonies. Public harmonies were nice. Private ones interested me more. Inside, the lobby wore municipal beige and the air smelled faintly of raincoats and old coffee. A wall display held a framed program from a dedication concert in '39, a black and white photo of a bell being hoisted skyward by a crane with nerves of steel, and a donor list whose typography had ideas above its station. The elevator arrived, looking like it needed an apology, and took us to the 4th floor. The corridor had been repainted in the last 5 years by someone with access to grey. Margot's key turned in the office door. I followed her into a space made of desks that were not new and files that were not private. Against the back wall, on a shelf above a row of binders, sat a brass call bell. It wasn't plugged into anything. It rang. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just a crisp, unreasonable ding that cut through the carpet and landed between my ears. It rang again, evenly spaced. Ding, ding, ding. Margot didn't move. "You see?" she said quietly. "It doesn't need permission." I crossed to the shelf and looked under it, at it, around it. No wire, no battery casing, no obvious fun. I kept my hands where Wolfe's instruction manual keeps them when electricity is present, at my sides. "Don't touch," she warned anyway. "It punishes curiosity." "You and Mr. Wolfe will get along," I said. I stepped back and listened. The interval was precise. 1 ring every 20 seconds. It felt like an exam I hadn't studied for. I took out my notebook. "All right, Miss Kincaid. Let's convene a little noise." I wrote the time, the interval, the description. "You'll gather your staff in when I give you the nod. Until then, nobody thinks they're on stage." I angled my head toward the bell. "And if that thing has a script, we'll learn our lines first." The bell answered on cue, bright and sure, as if it had been waiting for its cue all day. The bell kept its 20-second manners, and I kept mine. I timed 6 cycles to make sure it wasn't flirting with me, and wrote the numbers down because Wolfe likes numbers that behave. Margot stood neat and upright, with her hands on the back of a chair, like she was holding a meeting at the edge of a cliff. "Start with your people," I said. "One at a time. Casual summons. Nobody gets told the bell is today's star." She picked up her phone and made 3 calls that sounded like reminders, not alarms. I liked her economy. While she did that, I drifted a slow loop of the office. The shelf with the bell had no power strip nearby and no wall outlet within cord distance unless the cord was invisible and went through plaster as a personal hobby. The shelf brackets were steel. I squatted and studied the underside. The wood was smooth, unscarred. The bell sat on a felt pad the size of a coaster, black and tidy. If there was trickery, it had better posture than most men. The door clicked and brought in a woman with a bob and a notebook the size of a sandwich. She clocked me, then the bell, then Margot in that order, and none of it knocked her agenda off its rails. "Archie Goodwin," Margot said. "Lucy Waugh, program coordinator." "Coordinator?" Lucy repeated with a sideways smile, like she'd tried the word on and found it roomy. "Is this about the donor preview for St. Peter's?" "It's about everything that has been ringing lately," I said, and watched her face when the bell went ding. Her pupils tightened and she made a small mark in the notebook. Not scared. Cataloguing. "It's unnerving," she said. "We had clients in yesterday, and it started during Alan's pitch. He said he could work through it because art is endurance. The donors said it was avant-garde and left early." "Alan?" I asked. "Our artistic director. He's arriving unless a rehearsal kidnapped him." Lucy pulled a sheet from her notebook and handed it to Margot. "Here's next week's hall reservations." Rosalind wants the board. Photo op on Thursday moved to coincide with Mr. Tolland's check presentation, which isn't scheduled because he won't commit. She thinks if we set up the banner, the check will manifest. As magic goes, it's cheap. The bell dinged and she made another mark. Why the tally? I asked. Intervals, she said. They were 25 seconds last week, then 20 yesterday morning, then erratic for an hour when the electrician was here. I thought it cared who was in the room. It probably doesn't. But patterns matter when you work with musicians. They notice beats. I count them. That bought her a gold star on Wolfe's invisible chalkboard. The door gave us the second act. A square man in a knit cap and a face that believed in plumb lines. Dennis Pike, Margot said. Maintenance. He eyed me like I was a screwdriver left in the wrong drawer. The bell rang. He didn't look at it. He looked at the shelf brackets. Dead circuit after 7 p.m., he said to the air. I've killed it at the panel. Still rings, not ours. Not the building's unless the building learned to hum without juice. He slid 2 fingers along the underside of the shelf without touching the bell. No tremor. You didn't install this bell, I said. No, he said. It's decorative. Ness liked it. Put it there last winter because donors like props. His mouth made a shape like he'd bitten a nut with a rotten center. Ness wired his own little relay boxes for test chimes. He said they were temporary and he'd clean them up. He didn't. I removed what I found. What I didn't find is still doing this. Peter Ness, I said. Fired 6 months ago. Dennis's eyes cut to Margot and back. For cause. He was sloppy with schedules and proud of shortcuts. He also knew where everything lived. If he did this, he did it where I can't get at it without tearing walls. The door opened on cue and let in Art with a scarf. Alan Brome wore talent like a cologne, not unpleasant until it got on your cuffs. Is this another intervention? He asked. Or are we embracing chaos as a branding strategy? If it's the former, I'll perform repentance on the half hour. If the latter, I want lighting. It's neither, I said. Goodwin, I'm the new audience. Alan's glance hit the bell and bounced. We're a trust for bells, he said. One of ours asserting itself is practically on mission. The part where it stalks staff at home is not, Margot said. He spread his hands. Ritual invades domestic space. Ask any choir spouse. Still. The bell rang, and he flinched the amount a man flinches when he wants credit for not flinching. Still, I'll concede it's tiresome. Can we move it? No, Margot said. We're preserving its civil rights, I added. Sit down, Mr. Brome. We're testing whether your patience is naturally short or aggravated by sound. He grinned at me like we were in the same line of work and took a chair. That left Havel, who arrived carrying the expression accountants bring to conversations about art. He nodded to Margot, inclined an inch to me, and went to a file cabinet as if to check whether it still reciprocated. Mr. Havel, I said, anything new in envelopes? He paused with his hand on a drawer. There was one at reception 20 minutes ago, addressed to Miss Kincaid. I took it to her desk. He opened the drawer and removed a manila envelope with the corner neatly slit. Inside was a photocopy of a donor ledger page, one name ringed in red pencil. Tolland, pledge, deferred. In the margin, a small printed sentence, ring when ready to be reasonable. Show timestamp, I said. He pointed to the envelope, a mailroom sticker with 3:38 written in tidy block letters. It was now 3:41 by my watch. The bell struck at 3:42. I took the envelope to the window for light. This copy of the ledger, where does the original live? In my locked cabinet, Havel said promptly, and in Miss Kincaid's office for current donors. The latter is in a binder. The former is filed by month and would require knowing my system, which I do not share casually. Casual sharing is out, I said. How many people have keys to your cabinet? 1, he said. Me. Dennis made a sound like a cough with opinions in it. The locks on those cabinets are courtesy locks. A decent letter opener can persuade them. Havel didn't bother to look offended. The point is not the strength of the lock. It is that I would notice if papers were misfiled. I notice. The bell dinged. I noticed something else. The felt under it had turned a hair clockwise since I'd first looked. Not much. A slit of black showing that hadn't been showing before. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the building breathed. Maybe I liked trouble. I used the phone on Margot's desk and got Wolfe. He answered on the third ring and said my name like it was a report title. Mechanical bell, regular interval at 20 seconds. I said. No visible power. Steel brackets, felt pad. Office population now includes Lucy, Dennis, Alan, and Havel. Envelope with a copy of donor ledger, Tolland ringed, delivered at 3:38. Quality of the sound? He asked. True strike, not a recording, I said. But if there's a magnet doing the hitting, it's shy. You will acquire a small compass and hold it near the bell at rest, then at the instant of the ring. Observe any deviation. You will also note who looks at the bell before it sounds, and who after. A pause that folded a disapproval into 2 syllables. Do not touch. I am a model of abstinence, I said. Peter Ness's shadow is in the room. So is Venner's ambition and Tolland's checkbook. Do not let the names ring louder than the facts. The note is coercive. The bell is the instrument. The motive is control, not spectacle. Proceed. He hung up because that's how he says affection. I turned and found Lucy watching my mouth, not my eyes. Sharp woman. Compass, she asked. Stationer on the corner usually sells little ones for schoolboys, I said. I'll take Dennis to admire their craft. Dennis grunted that he wasn't a shopper. I told him this would be under protest, and he looked marginally happier. While we haggled, Alan wandered toward the shelf with the bell like it had asked for an autograph. Don't, Margot said, flat. I wasn't going to touch it, he said, stopping exactly a respectful inch away. I was going to tell it that art is timing and timing is choice, and this is a poor composition. The bell rang at his choice, crisp as a laugh. He stepped back. See, he said lightly to no one. Critics. Save the patter, I told him. We'll be back in 10. Lucy, time the next 20 dings and note any hiccups. Mr. Havel, check your cabinet and your binder for any new, reasonableness. Miss Kincaid, lock your desk and keep your door open. We hit the hall. The corridor smelled like paint with an alibi. In the elevator, Dennis scratched the knit cap off his head and looked at me without fondness. You think Ness, he said. I think whoever did it wants Miss Kincaid to pretend to agree with them until the pressure stops, I said. That's not art. That's extortion with manners. Extortion belongs to men with less patience, Dennis said, and jabbed the lobby button. This took planning. Which means it leaks somewhere, I said. Plans do. Bells do. People who love control do. On the way out, the receptionist called after us. Miss Kincaid just buzzed. She wants to know if either of you removed the pencil from her desk cup. Which pencil? I asked, because it's a healthy reflex. The red one, she said. The one she uses when donors get frisky. We hadn't. The bell upstairs was still ringing every 20 seconds. If it had fingers, they were inked. Dennis and I took the corner like a pair of decent citizens and found the stationer, the kind of place that survives on school lists and people who still prefer paper to confession. The bell over the door announced us without shame. The woman behind the counter looked up, clocked Dennis's knit cap and my intentions, and relaxed when neither of us asked for a notary. A small compass, I said. The sort a Boy Scout would sneer at and a detective would love. And a wax pencil, red. Grease type if you've got it. She produced both like a conjurer who wished the rabbits made more conversation. The red was the exact shade of trouble. Carmine number 924 stamped on the side in gold. I added a pocket mirror and paid for my relationship with the analog world. As she bagged, she said, "You're the ones, with the bells." "Allegedly," I said. "Do we look like we deserve it?" "You look like you'll fix it or make a neat stack of notes about why you didn't," she said, and gave me a smile I wouldn't borrow. Back upstairs, the corridor had the same quiet, the quiet of a building waiting to see if something permanent has changed. The receptionist handed me a pink message slip before I hit the door. "Another envelope, $3.50, she said, "but Miss Kincaid told me to sit on it until you were in the room." Inside, the 20-second metronome had stayed faithful. Lucy had filled a page with times in tidy columns. Alan was draped in a chair reading a program as if it had offended him last year, and he'd forgiven it on probation. Havel sat with a ledger open and the expression of a man trying to teach it invisible ink. Margot stood in her office doorway, one hand on the jamb. She had a temper that kept its hair in place. "Envelope," I said, and she handed it over. Same photocopied style, a different page. This time, the red circle embraced a name I didn't know, Bennett, annual, pending, and the same neat printed sentence. "Ring when you've accepted what you can't control." "You lend out wisdom," I told the envelope, and opened it for light and smell. Ink machine, office, no perfume, no cigarette. The sticker time matched the receptionist's, 3:50. The bell struck right on schedule and felt smug. I took the compass out and held it a foot from the bell. The needle thought about north and held. At 6 inches, it told me north had moved to the wall behind the shelf. At 2 inches, it started a nervous habit. I waited for the ring, half a heartbeat before the ding. The needle twitched sharply left, snapped back, then wobbled like a drunk correcting for pride. I did it again on the next cycle. Same twitch, same wobble. If that bell wasn't getting stroked by a magnetized something within arm's length, I'd eat Dennis's hat. "Electromagnet," Dennis said, bereaved. "In the wall." "In a bracket, maybe," I said, holding the compass by the left support. The needle leaned dutifully. On the right, it behaved. The left bracket was painted the building's agreeable gray. A small chip near the top showed bare metal. Lucy edged closer and peered past me with her bob neat as a rule. The bell rang and she didn't jump. In my book, that was better than applause. "It was 25 seconds last week," she said. "Then 20. If whoever set this is watching, they're close enough to adjust, but you know that." "I know it," I said. "I want to know who thinks they can orchestrate Miss Kincaid's life with a wall and a wire." I held the pocket mirror flat on the shelf behind the bell without touching the brass. The reflection gave me the underside. Felt pad flush, no appendages visible, no gnat-sized robot with a resentment. If there was a relay, it lived behind the bracket or inside, the wall, and Dennis wasn't wrong about tearing plaster. Wolfe's voice came through my ear from memory. "Don't." I logged times, then used the new red pencil to dot the felt at 12 o'clock where it peeped out from under the bell. "Control," I announced, "meet witness. If that black ring turns, we'll know by how much and when." Lucy noted the minute of the mark because she was the sort who does. The bell rang as if insulted by the introduction of evidence. "Who had the ledger in their hands since 2 p.m.? I asked. Havel kept a finger in the book like he was holding a place for his honor. "I processed Mr. Bennett's pledge status at 2:05. Miss Kincaid reviewed it at 2:15, then it went back into my cabinet at 2:20. I have not surrendered custody of the originals since." "Copies are different," I said, lifting the new photocopy. "Who has a machine?" "Reception," Lucy said, "and the copy room on 3, and the bishop's office 2 doors down if you like your paper blessed." "Anyone visit you between 3:30 and 3:50? I asked the room. "Rosalind called," Margot said. "She wanted to know if I was prepared to lean into synergy on Mr. Toland." I told her I prefer to lean into facts. That conversation lasted 2 minutes and an aphorism. She looked at my red pencil. "Where did you get that?" "Stationer," I said. "It matches the handwriting's hue. You're out one." "I didn't misplace it," she said. "It was in the cup at 2:45 when I left for the hall, and missing at 3:10 when I came back because Alan insisted he needed sympathy for the bell's timing. Alan gave her a smile you couldn't pay for and wouldn't want. I needed a sympathetic ear, not a pencil." "Where were you at 3:50? I asked him. "I was here," he said. "Suffering. Havel can vouch. I used his calculator to estimate how much donor patience decreases per ding." "I can vouch that my calculator returned to me," Havel said. "What it did on vacation is between it and its conscience." "Fine," I said. "We'll check cameras." "There are none," Havel said. "This floor has instincts, not surveillance. The building cameras are in the lobby and by the freight." "Which tells us drop-off times," I said and turned to Lucy. "Take me to the copy room." We rode down to 3 with Dennis, who kept swallowing oaths like hard candy. The copy room had the jolly despair all copy rooms have. A machine the size of a canoe and cabinets that smelled like paper and a life misspent. There was a wastebasket. I'm sentimental about wastebaskets. I tipped it out on the table and sorted. Lucy, to her credit, didn't flinch at the mess. On top, we found 3 cover sheets with the Trust logo and 2 test sheets with gray bars, then 2 copies of a donor page with the bottom half cut off. Bennett's name visible. No red ring. The time stamp at the top read 1531 in the machine's quiet font. 1531, I said. "Who came down at 5:31 in Trust language?" "Alan," Lucy said, and supplied an alibi before he asked for one. "He went to print the revised program for Saturday. His office printer is theatrical but lazy. He came back humming something in Phrygian." In my defense, Alan said, "Not present, but present anyway. I do everything in Phrygian when I'm annoyed." "Did you copy donor pages?" I asked Lucy. "I didn't," she said. "But anyone could. The copy room is a democracy." "Sometimes democracies get captured," I said. I put the leaves back and checked the room's corners. No new cameras, no tripwires. A faint smell near the wall. Warm dust. Behind the copier, a junction box sat with its screws shining. Dennis bent and sniffed, which is maintenance for reading tea leaves. He straightened and gave me a look that said, "If I open this, we lose a wall." I nodded and we didn't. Back upstairs, the bell's behavior had adopted nuance. It was still ringing at 20, but the 6th interval after our return stretched to 22, then the 8th tightened to 19. Lucy's pencil kept up. The felt dot had rotated a fingernail clockwise. I could have convinced a jury if the jury had my taste in details. I phoned Wolfe. "Magnetic field on strike," I reported. "Left bracket likely houses a tiny coil or a friend of one. Interval wobble since we went to the copy room. Copy of Bennett's page at 3:31 downstairs. No red circle. Envelope upstairs at 3:50 with red circle. Miss Kincaid's red pencil vanished between 2:45 and 3:10. Also, advice continues to arrive about Tolland." Wolfe breathed. "The pencil," he said, "was not taken to deprive. It was taken to compare. Whoever copied Miss Kincaid's pencil wished to match hue and texture. He, or she, tested, found a match or not, and returned to the business of coercion. The wobble suggests observation. Someone adjusted the device upon your absence and presence." "You're suggesting eyes," I said, scanning the ceiling line. "Not cameras. Instincts. Or a line of sight with an operator." "Possibly both. You will position yourself where a view of the shelf can be had from the corridor without being seen in the room. You will have Miss Kincaid ask Mr. Brome to demonstrate a pitch for donors as if none of this existed. People reveal their tells when they believe the narrative is theirs." A pause. "And Archie, if you find the device, you will not disarm it. you will let the hand that made it show itself." "Roger," I said, and hung up. I told Margot the plan, and she nodded once like a conductor granting a downbeat. We set her in the office with Alan and Lucy and Havel as an audience. Dennis took a stool by the door with the serenity of a man waiting to hate something with reason. I stepped into the hallway where the copy of a tour. Plant had given up on pretending it was alive and leaned against the wall opposite the office door. From there, with the door half open, I could see the shelf and the bell in the mirror's corner, and also the corridor toward the elevators. A man turned the corner from the freight end and came up the hall at a pace that said he belonged. Mid-40s, barber who understood contrast, suit that fit and wanted pictures taken. He carried a slim leather folio and a face trained to smile at endowments. He was new to me and not to himself. Before he reached the threshold, he paused, half a step. His head tilted a degree toward the office, toward the shelf. The bell hadn't rung. He smiled, not at anyone, and took the last steps in. "Miss Kincaid," he said smoothly, "I thought we might—" The bell struck bright and sure, slicing his sentence into ribbons. He didn't startle. He looked annoyed, then schooled it. "Sink." Margot's mouth went thin. "Mr. Tolland," she said, "you're late." Tolland let the smile settle like a ship in berth and gave Margot the folio as if it were a certificate of innocence. "A draft," he said. "Language for a naming, contingent on alignment. We're all chasing the same virtue. Efficiency." The bell clipped the last word into confetti. He didn't flinch. He paused, as if cued, then resumed at a lower volume. "You know how press cycles work, Margot. Thursday is dead. Friday lives if you feed it. If we time the dedication with our launch event, the trust gets headlines it can't afford to buy." Margot didn't take the folio. "We don't sell our calendar to logistics. You lease it to art," he said pleasantly. "Art isn't punctual. I am. I'm offering you punctual art." "Generous," I said, and came in from the hall like I'd been born in door frames. "Goodwin, I time things for a living. When a man pauses before a bell rings, I ask whether he's a prophet or a rehearsed man." His eyes took me in and filed me under amusements to be tolerated. "I'm rehearsed," he said. "It's cheaper than prophecy." "Prove it," I said. I took his folio and set it on the shelf by the bell without touching brass. "We'll see if your paperwork influences the muse." Dennis made a noise that conveyed the spiritual content of profanity. The bell kept its 20, and I kept my face bland. I held the compass behind the folio. North didn't move for shipping. "Relax," I told Dennis without looking at him. "I'm not remodeling, just checking whether the magic is on retainer." I slid the folio off and put it on Margot's desk. "Mr. Tolland, you've been circled twice today in red. That's a color that means stop to children and donate to boards. Which do you prefer?" "Caution," he said. "It keeps people from running into things. I'm here to prevent a collision between your principles and your budget." Margot's mouth twitched, but not into a smile. "And the messages, Mr. Tolland? Ring when ready to be reasonable. Is that your tone or your ghostwriter's?" "I don't send anonymous notes," he said. "They're a coward's medium. If I wanted to instruct you, you'd have a meeting on your calendar and a check in your inbox. This—" The bell rang, and he gave it an irritable glance he probably reserved for late shipments. "Is juvenile." Lucy, who had been writing steadily, didn't look up. "Intervals have shifted twice since you arrived," she murmured. 19 after your hello. 22 when Archie moved to the hall. We're being watched, and whoever's watching is improvising." "From where?" I asked the air, and stepped back into the corridor again, letting the door angle break sight lines. The hall was its same polite self. The bishop's door 2 down stood ajar enough to offer theology to a draft. I walked to it and leaned in far enough to count chairs. Empty. On the jamb at head height, someone had very recently replaced a brass picture hook. The screw head was new, the paint halo not. I looked at it a shade too long for a man admiring hardware and got my blink quota out of the way. On the ceiling, the exit sign over the stairwell had a tiny chip in its red plastic the size of a pin. The building had suddenly acquired more eyes than a peacock. I went back in and moved a coat rack so it stood between the shelf and the corridor angle, tall enough to be a tree in a modest park. "Let's find out if our admirer needs a view," I said. The bell missed once. It wasn't dramatic. It just forgot itself for a beat, then came in late like a tenor with a cough. Lucy's pencil clicked. Dennis straightened. Tolland, for the first time, looked interested. "That's new," he said. "Not new," I said. "Noticed." I took the rack back 6 inches. The bell found its religion again. If someone's steering, they want to see the wheel. "Who?" Tolland asked, and it was almost genuine, like a man deciding whether to be angry or impressed. "Candidates abound," I said. "People who like order and prefer theirs. People who think rituals are prettier if they're theirs. People who think red pencil is a universal language." Havel closed his ledger and folded his hands on it gently, like it might be led to an altar. "If you imagine I'm photocopying donor ledgers and circling potential improprieties with Miss Kincaid's pencil, I suggest you observe my blood pressure when anyone moves a paperclip without notice. I don't do theatre." "Mr. Havel," I said, "I suspect you of noticing things until they confess. Theatre is optional." Tolland took a slow breath and relocated his smile to me. "My offer stands, Miss Kincaid. Align the dedication with our launch, and I'll underwrite your season. Decline, and I'll underwrite someone else's. That isn't coercion. That's choice." "Choice sounds like coercion to the person without options," Margot said. "We make our own." She looked at me. "Are we finished auditioning?" "Almost," I said. "One more test." I picked up the red grease pencil and twirled it. "Everybody writes a circle. One by one, on scrap. We'll compare pressure and habit." I handed out paper like a magician dealing honest cards. Lucy drew a precise ring, Alan a dramatic oval that wanted applause, Havel a careful coin, Dennis a heavy groove a carpenter could respect. Margot drew a circle that wasn't a circle. It was an emphasis, slightly thicker at the left because she was fighting the urge to underline. Tolland made his, then added a little tick at the top unconsciously, like a navigator indicating north. "Souvenir," I said, and pocketed the scraps. If our anonymous critic ever forgets his handwriting lessons and leaves a pressure signature, we'll have a choir to compare it to. "Are you finished with me?" Tolland asked, silk back over steel. "For now," I said. "If you want to be helpful, tell me who told you Bennett was pending." "Rosalind mentioned it," he said without the hesitation of a man who considers alternatives. "At lunch yesterday. She's persuasive when she's certain." "Rosalind Venner persuaded you to drop by today," I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. "She persuaded me to stop wasting time trying to get a straight answer from Miss Kincaid over the phone. I prefer to do business in person." He glanced at the bell. "And to ignore distractions." "Then ignore this one," I said, and walked him to the door. In the hall he paused just where he had before, that half step shy of the threshold. His eyes flicked to the exit sign with the nick and then away, so fast a man could call it a trick of the light. He left smiling at the receptionist because smiles are inventory, and took the elevator that rings a cheap single ding. I stayed a beat longer than natural, and then went for the stairwell instead of the car. The exit sign's housing came away under my fingers, a 1/4 inch, and then wouldn't, because I had a shred of self-control left. Fresh scuff marks on the paint above it told the rest of the story. Somebody on a ladder recently. I had a Saul Panzer itch between my shoulder blades. Back in the office, Dennis had his hands in his pockets because he'd put them there to save the building. "Say it," he told me. "Not yet," I said. Wolfe doesn't like announcements before dessert. I phoned him instead. Operator likely has a peephole, pinhole, in the corridor. Exit sign shows fresh work. Bell misses when we block its view. Tollins paused on the threshold, and he glanced at the sign. Good, Wolfe said. You will not touch the sign. You will let Mr. Panzer touch the block around it, and Miss Kincaid will invite Rosalind Venner to call this afternoon and insist upon a meeting here tomorrow with Mr. Tolland and the artistic director. If our Whistler wishes an audience, we will convene. Tonight, Archie, you will inspect Miss Kincaid's apartment. The domestic invasion is not merely echo, it will bear a signature. On it, I said. And Archie, yes, sir. Bells convene, he said. Let them convene for us. He hung up like a curtain. I told Margot. She looked relieved in the way a general looks when the plan requires the enemy to attack on schedule. I can get Rosalind, she said. She wants to be got. Do, I said, and bring in the bishop for color if he insists. Dennis, babysit the bracket with your eyes, not your tools. Lucy, keep your ledger of sins. Havel, guard your cabinet like a dragon with a graduate degree. Alan, yes, Alan purred. Practice performing while ignoring a bell, I said. Tomorrow you'll have an audience that thinks it's the show. He laughed the way men do when they're not sure whether they're flattered. I picked up the compass, the mirror, the red pencil, and the sense that someone in the building had finally decided he was a conductor. If he wanted an orchestra, he was about to get one. I took Margot's address and promised to be at her place before 3:17, which is an hour that deserves company. I left Dennis with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the bracket, and took Margot to the street with the kind of promise a man makes when he plans to keep it. I'd be at 9th before her Bell's preferred hour. Wolfe wouldn't cry if I skipped dinner, but Fritz might commit a French murder. I checked in at the brownstone long enough to report, swallow something with time that forgave crimes, and pick up a small flashlight, a length of black thread, and a roll of tape. Wolfe listened, nodded at the exit sign detail as if he'd ordered it himself, and reminded me that the objective wasn't to silence anything. We are convening, he said, not curing. When he puts a verb in italics, you don't argue, you translate it into legs. Margot's building had an old heart and new scars. The vestibule panel that pretended to organize buzzers showed a slot where a brass nameplate had been pried off recently and a single replacement screw that was shinier than its brothers. The super, a man named Silver with a jaw that believed in leniency for tools, met us at the elevator and explained that wiring was wiring, which in his dialect meant some of it was mystery and some of it was wrong. He unlocked a closet to show me the building's veins, cloth-wrapped cables, a puckered junction box, 2 modern splices that looked like a child's idea of improvement. I didn't touch. I put the compass on the lid of the junction box and the needle sighed toward a coil someone had slipped under the panel's left side. Not murder, but the intent to attract metal. Electrician last week, Silver said, scratching. Said he was with the trust, had a badge, thin guy with a hair that tried too hard. He said Miss Kincaid needed a steadier signal. I like steady, he shrugged. He put steady. What did the badge say? I asked. Carillon Trust, he said. Picture, lanyard, everything. He knew how to sound like he belonged. He squinted at Margot. You didn't send him? I did not, she said, and her tone could have soldered wires permanently. If he returns, ask him to wait. Forever. On the 4th floor, the corridor had the same grey confidence as at the trust, only narrower. Margot's door had a peephole that wasn't newly installed and a bell plate that was. Where the plate met the paint, at the top right screw, a reddish smear had collected in the groove. It might have been old rust if rust came in the shade of my new grease pencil. I held the pocket mirror to the underside lip and got a glimpse of a hairline seam the building hadn't asked for, Just enough to suggest a wafer sat between the plate and the wood. "Don't," Margot said softly, reading me. "If you pull it, it'll turn into a lesson." "I won't," I told her, and put a fingernail of black thread across the seam and taped the ends to the paint. If someone lifted the plate, we'd get a torn thread and a time by default. I did the same from jamb to door, a whisper of string that a careful hand might spot and a hurried one would snap. I kept the line low. Burglars look high first. Inside, her rooms had the discipline of a woman who spent her days imposing it elsewhere. 2 windows looked west to a slice of sky that had been bought and sold often. The cat met us, black and interested, and then ignored us with integrity. The buzzer lived on the inside wall near the kitchen, a round, brass, artless thing that had been there when Newton was still charting gravity. I held the compass. It shook itself awake at 4 inches out. At 2, the needle saw north and decided it preferred east for a blink. I didn't put the mirror behind the housing to peer. I'm trainable. Margot watched my hands and not my face. "You like work that doesn't look like work," she said. "I like to ask questions in a language devices don't think is a question," I said. "People lie. Magnets can't spell." She put water on for tea because that's how some people refuse anxiety. I walked the footprint of the rooms twice. On the bookcase, a row of programs acted like good citizens. In the kitchen, a rack of spices had their labels aligned like soldiers, except one jar, sumac, tilted 1/8 of an inch clockwise. I left it that way because a jar that wants attention twice is a jar trying to help. On the bedroom dresser, an oval of dust outlined where a small object had sat, and no longer did. The cat couldn't have lifted it. The cat had opinions, but no thumbs. "What lived here?" I asked. She came, looked, and frowned. "A brass handbell," she said. "A gift from a donor who thought every woman in my line of work wants one on her nightstand. I moved it last week to the kitchen to keep it from reflecting headlights at 3 a.m. It's not in the kitchen." "You didn't lend it," I said. "I don't lend symbols," she said. "If someone wanted a bell, we have a warehouse." Subtle trespass doesn't shout. It taps. Between the sumac and the missing bell and the new smear on the doorplate, the apartment had been visited by a person whose hobby was nerves. I called Wolfe and reported without poetry. He listened, grunted at badge, approved the thread, and announced that Saul would pay a call on silver tonight. No uniforms, no warnings. "If your nocturnal bell has a rhythm," he added, "I desire it written precisely. If it changes when you go to the window, note the change. If it changes when you exhale, note your breath." "I'll time my respiration," I said. How romantic. "You will humor me," he said, and hung up like a judge with a schedule. We waited without ceremony. At 10:30, the oboe teacher down the hall committed Strauss against the will of God. At 11, a cab coughed gravel. At midnight, the building gave up its day and let quiet take custody. Margot didn't talk. She moved around her own room exactly enough to feel at home in it and not enough to disturb any trap I'd left. I sat near the door with the compass flat on my knee and the flashlight cupped in case I needed to watch shadows without announcing I cared. At 3:14, the cat woke up, rose, and faced the door like something in the hall had agreed to an appointment. At 3:16, the compass needle developed a tick. At 3:17, the buzzer sounded a clean, clipped ring that rattled a glass on the counter and put a thin line in Margot's shoulders that hadn't been there. It stopped. It started again 5 seconds later, long enough to seem like a thought, not a malfunction. I wrote every interval. 5 seconds, 5, 8, 5, 13. On the 13, I stood and moved 1 foot toward the window. The next interval was 3. I stepped back. 7. I moved to the kitchen. 9. Whoever was playing our bell liked feedback or hated it. I held the compass 2 inches from the door plate, and the needle flung itself toward the hinge and back, clean as a conductor's cue. The thread on the plate didn't break. No one was lifting it now. The string across the jamb held. The bell was being fed current without hands. I switched off the lights and went to the peephole. The corridor was a blank rectangle and a low red glow from the exit sign at the far end. In the glow, something darker than shadow hung for a breath, then went. A suggestion of a head, then the negative of a head, then nothing. The next ring took 5 seconds. "Someone's watching for light changes," I said quietly, and Margot didn't ask how I knew. The rooms had learned to listen too. I took the flashlight, set it low behind the couch, aimed at the ceiling, and flicked it once in a tight strobe. The next interval cut in half. Then again, and it lengthened. The cat, who had opinions about games, went under the bed with speed. We let the sequence play until 3:29. The last ring hit dead at the original 5. The compass settled. I eased the door open half an inch and checked the thread. Intact. The peephole gave me an empty hall, but the exit sign down the way had acquired a tiny, fresh nick on its bottom lip where no nick had been earlier. I closed up, taped a second sliver of thread from the exit sign's underside to the wall, low where a mop might find it, and wrote the time. This one was for Saul. Margot made tea because sometimes ritual is the only thing a person can control, and she wasn't going to surrender that. The cat re-emerged, offended but alive. "Do you still think I'm melodramatic?" she asked. "No," I said. "I think you're besieged by someone with a small talent for theater and a large appetite for obedience." She sat, held her cup, and watched steam draft. "I don't do obedience." "Good," I said. "Tomorrow they'll try to conduct. Let them. We'll set the tempo." Fritz slid me eggs like a pardon, and Wolfe let me talk until the coffee had made him charitable. I gave him the 3:17 recital with the intervals, the compass twitch, the shadow that wasn't, the fresh nick on the exit sign, and the thread that stayed honest. He listened with his eyes half closed, which is when they do the most work. "Good," he said when I got to the part where the sequence changed when I moved. "Our whistler likes response. He has the vanity of a pedagogue." "Saul?" Saul arrived 10 minutes later with a paper bag that probably held something illegal in 3 states. Knowledge. He sat, nodded at me, and addressed Wolfe like a man reciting a psalm to the right God. "Exit sign on 4, the trust has a pinhole lens in the bottom lip and a board behind it the size of 2 postage stamps. Off the shelf, clean install. Power piggybacks on the sign's line, and a second wire runs into the wall right at the left shelf bracket. There's a peanut coil in that bracket, fed low voltage. The unit can be tripped by a line-of-sight remote, IR or laser, through the lens." I didn't pull it. I did take a photo. "And Miss Kincaid's apartment?" "Buzzer plate has a wafer under it, a reed switch with a tiny magnet epoxied to the plate itself. There's a microcoil adhered to the inside of the wall cavity, fed off the junction box. Somebody has been charming the building. The thread is a good touch. Untouched at 4 this morning when I left Silva contemplating electricity as a moral problem. Your exit sign thread." He grinned at me. "Gone by 5. Whoever checked the sign did it before the super woke up." Wolfe's nostrils agreed with him. "Our whistler patrols." "Or sent. Someone," I said. "Silva saw a thin guy with hair that tried for employment. Badge said Carillon Trust. He sold steady as a virtue." "Peter Ness," Saul said without adornment. "Possibly," Wolfe allowed. "His dismissal makes him available and aggrieved, but do not settle on him. Others could conscript him, others could imitate him." He fluttered his fingers. "Now you will perform. Archie, at the trust you will block the camera's sight line at intervals not regular enough to be predicted, and you will note who appears in the corridor within 2 minutes of a blocked view. You will also bait our pedagogue. Place an old red pencil on the shelf, one you can afford to lose, and dust the felt pad with a kiss of graphite. If the bell moves, we will have a smudge. Rosalind at noon," I reminded him. "She'll want to rearrange the planets." "She will have her chance tomorrow," he said. Today she will announce herself. I shall ring for Mr. Tolland at 4 tomorrow. For now, convene." He said it as if the word itself were a net. At the trust, the receptionist had a face for secrets and a desk for them too. She slipped me a whisper. "Envelope at 9:20. Miss Kincaid said to let you open it." Inside, a photocopy of the program order for Saturday with Alan solo, Benedictus circled in red, and the same small sermon. "Ring when ready to accept Providence." On the back, a speck of grease the color of carmine, number 924. I palmed it and kept the grease for dessert. Lucy had already posted at her table with 2 sharpened pencils and a timing sheet. Dennis stood under the shelf like a man guarding a patient and not permitted to wield a knife. The bell kept 20 like a soldier. I set our sacrificial red pencil on the shelf near the bell, puffed a little graphite onto the felt with a note that would have made Wolfe proud. QTY. Trace. And slid the coat rack into a position that half blocked the exit sign's view. Lucy counted. On the 3rd cycle, the bell missed, then resumed, haughty. The bishop breezed in with a smile like a stained-glass window and announced that suffering ennobles, then flinched when the bell punctuated him. He offered prayer as lubrication. I offered a chair. Rosalind Venner brought weather with her. Tall, precise, and dressed in a color that had a board seat of its own, she kissed the bishop's hair and Margot's cheek and occupied space as if it owed her rent. "Margot," she said warmly and without warmth, "I'm here to relieve your burden. The Tolland alignment is obvious. He gives a number. We give him a line in the program and a date that suits his press. Everyone wins." "Except the calendar," Margot said. "It loses." "Calendars are suggestions," Rosalind said. "Harmony is the aim." "The anonymous notes share your rhymes," I said. "Do you prefer ring when ready as a general admonition or only for holidays?" She turned the smile to me and turned it up. "And you are?" "Goodwin. I keep time." I moved the coat rack an inch. The bell hiccuped. Rosalind didn't look at it. She looked toward the corridor as if attention were a right she could claim on the hallway. Alan slipped in behind her and caught the ring with a theatrical grimace timed perfectly for the bishop's sympathy. Havel closed his drawer like a dignified clam. I drifted into the corridor. A man exiting the freight stair read a delivery slip with great absorption and the posture of someone being paid per slouch. He was thin, and his hair had been argued into obedience and lost. When he saw me, the surprise on his face was not theatrical, it was personal. I gave him bland and a hallway shrug. He walked past and left a smell behind him. Lemon oil and the ghost of solder, which is a scent that follows men who make small things work. I waited the prescribed 2 minutes and returned to the room. The bell was on schedule. The graphite smudge on the felt had acquired a thumbprint that wasn't mine. I looked at Dennis. He lifted his hands. I looked at Lucy. She shook her head. Havel offered me his immaculate palms as if they were tax returns. Alan splayed fingers that wanted applause. Rosalind was too clean for graphite to love her. The bishop had holy oil under his nails and would have blessed graphite into doctrine if asked. "Lunch?" Rosalind said brightly. "Mr. Tolland can be persuaded to be magnanimous over food. He admires appetite." Margot's eyes flicked to the shelf and then back to Rosalind's face without lodging. "We'll be sustaining ourselves," she said. "Here." Rosalind's phone thrummed once. She didn't look, which tells you a kind of power. "Tomorrow, then." 4. 4, I said, because I wanted her there when Wolfe drew his circle. She left like a sail catching a wind she'd been promised. At 1:30, another envelope. This one held the bishop's homily draft with a sentence bracketed in red. "The bell summons the willing and educates the reluctant." Underneath, the printed line, "Don't make us all reluctant." Margot read it once and put it down like a dish that burned. I phoned Wolfe and gave him Rosalind's weather, the bishop's perfume, Alan's flinched timing, and the skinny man with the lemon oil smell. "Saul," he said, "we'll find Mr. Ness before dinner and invite him to a performance tomorrow. We will make him useful. The graphite." "Print," I said. "Left thumb. Smudge on. Felt." "Good," he said. "Not for the police. For character. People who cannot resist touching instruments they didn't build do not stop at graphite. They make mistakes. We will arrange one." He paused. "The bishop?" "Useful as incense," I said. "And an alibi waiting to be employed." "At 4 tomorrow," he repeated, because he enjoys exact hours. "You will bring them. Today you will block and unblock, and you will make our pedagogue impatient." He exhaled, which is Wolfe's version of a flourish. "He has had his concert. Now he may have his audience." I put the rack across the sight line again and let the bell miss on the second beat. In the corridor, someone cursed softly, and the exit sign's housing gave a click like a man closing a compact. Dennis didn't move. Lucy's pencil wrote, tidy and relentless. Margot stood with her hands on the back of a chair, calm as a clock that had decided what hour it was. The graphite waited for the next thumb. By 2, I'd made a hobby out of being in the way. Every time the bell fell into a groove, I nudged the coat rack across the sight line as if I were indecisive about feng shui. The exit sign clicked once, tiny, ashamed. Twice, nobody came. The third time, our delivery sloucher reappeared from the freight end with a cardboard tray of coffees for nobody he could name. He saw me and recalculated his route like a cab driver seeing a barricade. Lemon oil trailed him like a calling card. "Break room?" I asked, amiable. "Office," he said, less. "You install as well as deliver?" He blinked, considered a lie, and let it go as an extravagance. "Sometimes I fix what gets broken by people who don't read instructions." "Name," I suggested. He shook his head, the way a man does when he wants to keep one thing for himself. "I'm late." He slid by. I watched the exit sign's pinhole and counted to 30. The bell caught up at 20 and kept time like it was being graded. Inside, Lucy's columns had become a little city of numbers, each block neat, the avenues straight. Dennis was still a statue under a pledge to Wolfe. Eyes, not tools. Margot took a call and said 4 twice, like a metronome. The bishop blessed my coat rack with an absent hand and drifted out, trailing a sentence fragment about patience that probably had an ending if you paid him. Alan prowled the shelf, careful not to touch the bell, and rehearsed his defiance of fate. Havel removed a paperclip and replaced it with one of identical vintage and mood. At 2:15, the receptionist delivered a fresh envelope like it might bite. Inside was a photocopy of a floor plan for Saturday's donor reception, with a red circle around the corner where Tollin's banner would photograph best. The script below didn't try for poetry. Ring when ready to accept the inevitable. On the paper's edge, a faint smear of grease lay where a thumb had steadied the page. Carmine had a way of getting promiscuous. I put it with its cousins. Wolfe phoned me, which he doesn't unless he needs my ears as well as my tongue. "Saul has Mr. Ness in a chair on 37th, he said. "Mr. Ness is perspiring, not lying, at least not about his role. He installed test coils last winter at Mr. Brome's request. Too many late rehearsals. Too few keys for the after-hour security man. But he swears he removed them when he packed his desk. He's hard. Also swears he did not put a lens in your exit sign, though he knows how. He claims he didn't need to." "Meaning someone else did," I said. "Or he wants to sell us a second act tomorrow." "He will appear," Wolfe said, "and perform. For now. The smell of lemon oil indicates a man who cares for his tools, not his ethics. If he returns, do not interrupt him. Interruptions produce improvisation, and improvisation produces mistakes on the wrong schedule." "Rosalind at noon," I reminded, though she'd come and gone and left her aftertaste. "She's a woman for whom the word calendar is a synonym for conquest. Wolfe said. Observe, but do not sermonize. Have you your graphite? I checked the felt. The faint dot I'd drawn at noon had crept another hair clockwise and now carried on its edge a thumb's crescent, a little moon of grime. I showed it to Dennis, and he swore in carpentry. Still nobody touched, he said through his teeth. Somebody touched while nobody was looking, I said. That's the only kind of touching our man enjoys. At 3, Margot went to her office and came back carrying the red grease pencil I'd bought, sharpened to a chisel point that wasn't mine. She held it like a subpoena. Found in my cup, she said. New point? I didn't sharpen. Who did? Someone who thinks pencils are improved by obedience, she said. You see the theme. I smelled it. The point smelled faintly of lemon, which is what happens to wood shaved by a hand that oils its tools. I didn't say it aloud because I like a man to hang himself in public, not in a rehearsal. At 3:10, the receptionist called in a tremble that wasn't fear, just good breeding under stress. There's a small parcel for Miss Kincaid. No return address. I took the elevator down and let the lobby camera love me. The parcel was brown paper and neat string with a knot tied by a finger that trusted itself. Inside, nested in the tissue, lay Margot's missing handbell from her dresser, polished within an inch of arrogance. Around its handle, a narrow ribbon had been tied, and to the ribbon a small card, for the public harmonies. The ink was not red this time. It was that tidy print we'd been fed, in black. On the bell's rim, a ghost of sugar crystals and the faintest smear of tea stain. It had kissed a kitchen before someone wiped it well. My shoulder blades considered citizens' arrest. My brain vetoed on Wolfe's behalf. I carried the bell upstairs, like a man balances nitro. Margot saw it and didn't blink. I'm not surprised, she said. If you're going to instruct a woman, begin by rearranging her house. Who has a key to your apartment? I asked. Me, she said. The super has a master. I changed the cylinder last winter. Peter Ness installed the new plate for me when the buzzer stuck. He claimed a secret right of the adjacent coil. I paid him $50 and a promise never to tell him he was smart. Who else? I pressed. No one, she said. The neighbor with the oboe is allergic to responsibility. I wrapped the bell back in its manners and set it on Margot's desk. Don't touch it, I told the room, which was good theater because the only person considering it was me. At 3:30, an interruption the size of a habit. The bishop again, with a man in a black suit whose haircut came free with ordination. The bishop's aide didn't sit. He surveyed the shelf, the bell, the coat rack, and, if eyes have grammar, conjugated ownership in the third-person plural. We'll need the reception plan altered, he told Lucy, who was not his subordinate. The bishop's remarks should be central, not supplemental. Talk to the board vice chair, Margot said evenly. I take choreography, not doctrine. He bristled. The bell cut him off like a gavel. It's a poor thing, but mine. I liked it when our instrument did the heckling. At 3:40, the exit sign clicked again and the bell skipped a beat. I stepped into the corridor, with nothing but a yawn and the pocket mirror in my palm like a toy. The sloucher was back, without coffee. He had a lanyard now, Carillon Trust, printed, and a tool roll under his jacket that wanted to pretend it was a newspaper. Badge suits you, I said. It's a loan, he said, like morals. You, Peter Ness? I asked it without savor. He hesitated the breath a man takes to imagine a clean life. Sometimes, he said. Tomorrow you'll be Peter Ness in a chair at 4, I told him. We're convening. Convening, he repeated, and you could see him taste the word on his tongue like a coin. He started to move past me, then changed his mind and looked into the office. His eyes landed not on the bell but on Margot. He loved her, or hated her, or loved hating how she didn't need him. I'm not a mind reader, but I've watched faces make algebra. He swallowed and tried on insolence. "Tell her she owes me a listen." "Tell her yourself," I said. He shook his head. "Tomorrow." He touched the exit sign housing with a thumb as he went by, a caress, not a fix, and left lemon oil and a legal amount of courage behind him. At 4, I phoned Wolfe from Margot's desk. "Ness showed," I said. "He carries borrowed authority and oils his virtues. He touched the sign. Margot's bell came home in a box with a ribbon. The pencil returned with a point. Rosalind left intent and a time. Tolland is on deck. The bishop wants to be inevitable." "Good," Wolfe said. "People are deciding who they are. It will save me labor tomorrow." He paused. "Miss Kincaid." I looked at her. She'd taken the little card from the parcel and set it face down, then squared the edges with 2 fingers as if alignment could unsay it. "She's steady," I said. "Then so are we," Wolfe said. "At 6 you will leave the trust with a visible packet of something that looks like donor lists. You will walk to the corner, pause, and return as if you'd forgotten your hat. If our pedagogue has brought a chorister with light fingers, he will take the bait. Miss Kincaid, meanwhile, will be seen to lock her office and leave by the front." He hung up because Grace notes spoil his appetite. I told Margot the play. She nodded and reached for her coat. The bell rang obediently on the 20. It had been an instrument all day. Tomorrow it would be an audience. At 5:50, I built a packet that looked like it could buy a year of programming and a lawsuit. A dozen sheets with donor totals big enough to insult the modest, a mock-up of Saturday's reception floor plan, and a schedule that suggested Tolland's banner had a favorite corner. On the bottom edge of the top sheet, I rubbed a whisper of graphite from the same paper that had fed our bell. Not enough to gray a finger, enough to love a cuff. I tucked the whole thing into a manila folder stamped "Donor Reallocations," because men who can't resist control can't resist that phrase. I left it on the corner of Margot's desk for the room to envy, then picked it up with the care you give Nitro and told the receptionist I'd be right back. The lobby camera took my picture, which is its hobby. I walked to the corner, paused long enough to show a man changing his mind, then swung back like a hatless citizen who had remembered both his manners and his bait. In the elevator, I pressed 4 and 3 with the same finger because I like to see who takes the wrong ride. On 3, the copy room coughed to life in a way that made my little heart tap. I eased the door with my shoulder. Inside, the bishop's aide, same haircut, same suit, was feeding a stack through the machine with the tenderness of a man baptizing paper. He had the posture of ownership and the face of a man who collects it. The top sheet in his outgoing pile said, "Donor Reallocations," in my tidy block letters. He didn't see me until the copier did its happy beep, and I said, "Confessions down the hall." He started, but only the amount a professional allows. Up close, he smelled like starch and fervor. On the white cuff that peeked from his sleeve, a crescent of gray sat at the edge, like the moon reconsidering. He followed my eyes and didn't blush. He recalculated. "Miss Kincaid asked me to prepare these for the bishop's review," he said. The bell upstairs, 20 seconds away, rang faint from here, a metronome in the walls. "She didn't," I said cheerfully. "The bishop needs review more than the papers do." He squared his shoulders. "Your staff?" "Friend of the calendar." I reached past him and stopped the copier with a nail. "You can keep your copies, Father." "Kellen," he said, the syllables clipped. "The bishop's office has stewardship over—" "Souls," I said. "Paper belongs to Havel." I lifted the original packet from his in-tray. The bottom edge had kissed his cuff. The graphite answered from his linen like a signed receipt. He reached as if to take it back, and then didn't, because there are some gestures you don't make in front of a witness unless you want to need a lawyer. "Miss Kincaid is letting this situation erode confidence," he said. "The public believes in harmony. We provide it." "You provide ceremony," I said. Harmony is earned. I held his gaze a beat longer than polite, then pocketed the packet and stepped out of his radius. If you're looking for a page with a red circle, you'll need the anonymous service. Try the exit sign. He blinked. Whatever lived behind the exit sign in his mind flickered. I don't know what you mean. You don't have to, I said. You only have to stop pretending you have a key to more doors than you do. He collected his copies and left by the freight as if a front were a sacrament. I let him go. Saul likes tales without fanfare. On 4, Lucy looked up as I came in. While you were gone, she said, 17, 23, 17, twice, then back to 20. Someone got excited, I said. I set my packet on Margot's desk and checked the shelf. The graphite dot on the felt had crept another hair clockwise. Beside it, faint as a fingerprint after washing, a grey crescent curved where a thumb might steady a bell that insists it isn't being touched. Dennis hadn't moved except to age. The receptionist buzzed. Mr. Goodwin, a car just pulled to the curb. Woman in it I've seen with Miss Venner. She didn't come in. Window, I told Lucy. We looked down together. A black town car idled, playing at discretion. The back door cracked, a hand reached out, and Father Kellen dropped a slim envelope into it with the professional humility of a man who believes in hierarchy. The door shut. The car glided away. I phoned Saul and gave him the plate. Got it, he said. She's headed west. I'm behind a bus in the moral majority. I'll let you know who hugs who. He hung up because Saul's sentences don't waste calories. Margot came in from a call with Rosalind that had offered the illusion of choice and the reality of orders. She looked at the packet and then at me. You left to make a point, she said. Who took it? Your bishop's long hand, I said. He loaned the point to Rosalind's car. Of course he did, she said. He does collaboration like a power plant does light. At 6 on the dot, Wolfe's schedule held hands with mine. I took the packet in full view, nodded at the receptionist as if I'd been granted leave to misbehave, and carried it to the corner. I stopped to look in a shop window at a suit that didn't want me, then turned back. In the lobby, the guard pretended poorly not to watch. The elevator sighed me up. In the corridor, the exit sign made its little click again. Guilty. I walked in on empty air and an office that had acquired a small rearrangement. The coat rack was 2 inches to the left of where I'd set it, and the sacrificial red pencil had rolled a fraction on the shelf. Nobody in the room had touched it. Everybody said so with the same innocent face. The bell, not asked for a cue, rang right on 20 out of spite. My phone hummed. Saul. Envelope from Kellen to Venner. Venner to a man with PR shoulders. PR shoulders to Tolland's driver. They all love one another. Now Venner and the driver are in a bar with glass. Ness is at the end of the block with a club soda and a stare. I'll keep him thirsty. Good, I said. Tomorrow at 4. Bring them all hungry. I called Wolfe and delivered the parade. He grunted approval at Kellen's cuff, Venner's appetite, and Tolland's driver's existence. We will not accuse them, he said. We will ask them questions arranged so that only the guilty can answer them without contradiction. The bell will assist. How? I asked, because I like to hear him arrange a room. You will remove your coat rack at 3:55 tomorrow, he said. You will sit where the operator expects you not to. You will ask Mr. Brome to perform 2 minutes at exactly 4:07 while Miss Venner begins to speak of alignment. At 4:10, when the bell punctuates precisely on a phrase that betrays control, you will close the door. We will not permit escape to equipment. He paused. Saul will be with Mr. Ness in the corridor and prevent vandalism. Mr. Ness has been told that if he wishes credit for his work, tomorrow is his last chance to retrieve it from the hands of his patron. Peter likes credit, I said. He smelled like lemon and recognition. Pfui, Wolfe said mildly. He smells like the man who believes he is indispensable to a conspiracy and is about to discover he is not. His tone suggested he had met that man before and had not kept the friendship. I looked at Margot. She had sat, finally. The handbell parcel lay open on her desk. The ribbon was a line of blood against the tissue. She didn't touch it. She was letting the room learn where she stood. The cat would have approved. "Do we go back to 9th?" I asked her. "Yes," she said. "I want to be where he expects me to be when he tries again." She stood and took her coat, not the parcel. The receptionist gave us a look that said she liked us and disliked drama. The elevator did its cough. On the way down, Lucy handed me a fresh sheet, times and intervals, neat as an indictment. At the bottom she'd written a note in small print. 3 times when Archie left. 17:23:17. When he came back, 20. Whoever's playing wants an audience. "Tomorrow he'll have it," I told her. "We sell tickets. Bring your pencil." Back on 9th, the thread at Margot's buzzer plate lay intact, which told me one thing. Our pedagogue preferred the stage on West 53rd for tonight. The cat met us, listened at the door with its entire spine, and decided the quiet was honest. We set our watches for 3:17 anyway. You respect ritual even when you don't bend the knee to it. At 2:38, my phone buzzed once. Saul. Ness went home with his tools. Venner went home with her certainty. Tolland's driver went where drivers go to lie about their bosses. At 3:09, the compass began to twitch. At 3:17, the buzzer performed its little catechism. I timed it with the same care as last night. 5, 5, 8, 5, 13. On the 13, the cat looked at me like it was my turn to conduct. I stayed still. The intervals settled. Whoever was watching through the exit sign of our apartment building, and there was one. The super would find it tomorrow, liked the obedient. At 3:30, the room exhaled. Margot refilled our tea. We didn't speak for a while. When we did, it wasn't about bells. "You ever work for a sound that wasn't a crime?" she asked. "Once," I said. "It was music. I fired it." She nodded like that made us kin. Outside, the city turned over in its sleep and remembered how to be loud. Tomorrow it would be on time. Tomorrow at 4, Wolfe would sit, the bell would convene, and somebody who believed in inevitability would discover the limits of what a coil and a pinhole can command. Wolfe gave the morning to orchids and the afternoon to strategy, which is how he forgives the world for existing. At 3, I took a car to the trust with a chair that wasn't his, but had the decency to look like it might hold a monarch without protest. We set it facing the shelf, a little off-axis, so he could ignore everyone in the room without turning his head. Dennis stood the way carpenters do when a wall has insulted them. Lucy had fresh columns and a watch synchronized to the bell's vanity. Havel arranged the ledger and made it supple. Margot ran a comb through the idea of chaos and pinned it. At 3:55, I slid the coat rack out of the corridor's view as ordered. The exit sign gave its guilty click. I opened the door wider and let the room breathe. The bell kept 20 like it had a union. They came in layers. Rosalind arrived first with an expression that suggested she'd already forgiven us for agreeing with her. Behind her, Father Kellen did neat disapproval with his collar and carried a folio whose posture suggested he liked to open it on other people's desks. Tolland brought weather you pay retainer fees for and a smile calibrated for front pages. Alan slid in last among the principals and tested the room like a tenor finding the acoustic. The bishop floated. I would have preferred a kite. Dennis stayed an architectural feature. Lucy gave me her pencil like a sword. Havel sat where he could see hands. Wolfe entered as if the room had come to him. He didn't rise, which was good, as he wasn't standing. He placed his fingertips together and let the silence consider him. "Thank you," he said, and the bell obeyed with a ring that had the good manners to wait its turn. "We have endured coercion disguised as counsel. We have endured advice delivered by devices. Today, we will dispense with devices and ask the persons responsible to speak in their own names. No one confessed out of turn. Good rooms rarely get that lucky. "Mr. Brome," Wolfe said, not looking at him. "At 4:07 precisely, you will play at the suggestion of Miss Venner, not before." Alan's mouth twitched. "I take suggestions from art, not boards." "Today, you will take them from my clock," Wolfe said, and closed his eyes without closing his attention. We idled 3 minutes that felt like paragraphs with the verbs removed. The bell hit 20, 20, 20. At 4:07 by Lucy's page, Rosalind, who has the gift of timing even when she doesn't deserve it, lifted her chin and began, "Before we lose what Friday can buy." The bell struck as if it had waited for buy. Alan took his cue with a chord that wanted incense and got dust. Wolfe's eyelids didn't quiver. I stepped to the door and swung it shut. The exit sign's click died in the corridor like a man who'd been told the audience had changed terms. Saul was in the hall with Ness because that's where he said he'd be. There was no scuffle. Saul doesn't scuffle. He edits. He opened the door 2 inches, handed me a small remote the size of a lighter, and closed the door again on a sentence Ness hadn't planned to say out loud. "Mr. Ness," Wolfe said to the room, as if the door were a window, "we'll wait. He is an instrument. We require the composer." Rosalind frowned the way a woman frowns when she is being asked to entertain the possibility she is not currently winning. "This performative framing," she said, and the bell caught her at performative, like an insult preferring consonants. "Miss Venner," Wolfe said, "the notes that have urged Miss Kincaid to surrender her calendar were written by a hand that likes imperatives disguised as inevitabilities. Ring when ready. Advice from a god in a cheap mask. The envelopes traveled from Father Kellen to your car, from your car to a publicist in Mr. Tollin's employ, and back again to your driver. That does not prove authorship. It proves appetite. Appetite alone bores me. The control here is more intimate. It required keys to wiring and a taste for intruding on domestic quiet, which you lack." She smiled like a blade. "Thank you." "It also required a proxy who could be paid in flattery and redemption," Wolfe continued, "which you possess. But proxies do not invent signatures. Pedagogues do." Kellen cleared his throat. "If by pedagogue you mean a priest who cares for public order, I mean a man who believes instruction should be felt before it is understood," Wolfe said. "A man who would ring a bell in a woman's apartment to teach her the virtue of obedience. A man whose cuff today wore the graphite from Mr. Goodwin's decoy packet because he copied what was never his to keep. A man whose job confers access to rooms and to trust, but does not confer taste." Kellen's jaw elected rigor. "You're implying—" "I am implying very little," Wolfe said evenly. "I am inferring a pattern. Your hand delivered papers to Miss Venner. Your cuff collected graphite from a packet you were not asked to prepare. Your vocabulary, in the bishop's draft you edited, includes the phrase, 'educates the reluctant.' Your admiration for order would welcome a bell that insists, but you did not build the instrument." Kellen looked at the exit sign, which is a tell I recommend avoiding. "I've done nothing illegal." "No," Wolfe agreed. "You have done something worse for your aspirations. Something crude. You have outsourced art to engineering. You hired Mr. Ness to install a lens in an exit sign and a coil in a shelf. You suggested the schedule to a donor who wishes publicity to be providence. You wrote notes you believed were harmless pressure because they did not bloody the nose. In truth, Mr. Kellen, they bled respect, yours. Sit down." He sat, which surprised him more than it did me. Tolland had the grace to look at his shoes. "I'm not party to wiring," he said soberly. "I prefer clean coercion. If Miss Venner passed me information, it was because the trust cannot afford to leave money in a drawer." Rosalind took the opening like a pianist. "If our communications were imperfect, it was because Miss Kincaid insists on purity when the city requires compromise." The city requires competence, Margot said, and used no more volume than necessary. Wolfe made a small sound. Not indulgence, not impatience, the noise he makes when an argument removes its coat to stay. "Mr. Ness," he said toward the door. Saul opened it and delivered him. Thin, hair that had rehearsed in Mr. Q, the lemon oil scent of a man who loves his tools more than company. "Peter," Wolfe said, his voice flat as a carpenter's table, "who paid you for this afternoon's vigilant service?" Ness looked at Margot and decided he was still the hero in someone's story. "Nobody pays me to care," he said. "They pay me to fix what people like Miss Kincaid break." "Try again," Wolfe said, his tone making room for truth like a chair. Ness swallowed. "Father Kellen asked me to stabilize the building's signals," he muttered. "He said the trust needed structure. Miss Venner said if I helped keep schedules honest, there'd be recommendations when I looked for new work." "Recommendations and righteousness," Wolfe said. "A toxic ration. The coil in the shelf bracket is yours. The lens in the exit sign is yours. The wafer under Miss Kincaid's apartment plate bears your epoxy. The timing language in the notes is Father Kellen's. The distribution is Miss Venner's. The object is Mr. Tolland's banner, though he would prefer to call it alignment. The trespass everywhere is yours." Ness's mouth made a shape like apology and ended up on confession. "It wasn't supposed to be at her apartment," he said to the floor. "That was me. I wanted her to know I could." The room took that in the way rooms do when they collectively decide which sin is the one that matters. Margot didn't move. Wolfe opened his eyes. "We will not debate your ethics, Mr. Ness. We will only mark the sequence." The bell's interval tightened when Mr. Goodwin blocked your view and loosened when he returned. The graphite on the felt carries your left thumb's crescent. The packet's smear carries Father Kellen's. Miss Venner's car, of which Mr. Saul Panzer is unexpectedly fond, has the bishop's aide's envelopes in its door pocket. Mr. Tolland's driver is less careful than his employer. These are not impressions. They are facts. Tolland set his jaw. "What do you want?" he asked Wolfe, which is a man's way of asking how to buy his way out of a story. "I want the devices removed without damage," Wolfe said. "I want a letter from the bishop apologizing for overreach, signed by the aide who applied the signature to Faith. I want Miss Venner to resign her vice chair with a statement praising Miss Kincaid for preserving ritual against fashion. I want Mr. Tolland to make his donation without a banner and without owning Saturday. He may pick Monday at 10 and learn humility. And I want Mr. Ness to return the handbell to Miss Kincaid's dresser, in person, after he has signed a confession for the police and for me." "Police?" Ness said, frantic with smallness. "The police care less for wires than for trespass," Wolfe said. "You trespassed. Your redemption will be bureaucratic. It is better than the alternative." Rosalind lifted her chin. "You presume a great deal of authority, Mr. Wolfe." "No," he said, and for the first time looked at her. "I exercise it." The bell rang at 20 like a salute. "Shall we proceed?" Tolland's mouth did finance before his brain did conscience. He measured the room, the odds, and the ways a headline could pronounce him clean. "Monday at 10, he said finally. "No banner. A photograph of the check will suffice." "It will," Wolfe said. "You will not bring a publicist to the photograph." Tolland inclined his head as if he were accepting a benediction that didn't stain. Rosalind's turn. She made the little adjustment powerful people make when they realize power's a lease. "I won't be bullied out of serving," she said, but it lacked starch. "I will, however, decline the vice chair to avoid distraction. The statement can be drafted tonight. It will mention Miss Kincaid's fidelity to stewardship," Wolfe said. "Without it, your statement becomes public relations, not penance." Her nostrils took that personally. "Understood." Kellen had kept his eyes on the floor long enough to memorize it. "I intended order," he said. "I did not intend trespass." You intended obedience, Wolfe said. Order would have survived conversation. Trespass is what men commit when they prefer effect to consent. He twitched 2 fingers. Mr. Goodwin. I opened the door 2 inches. Saul handed me the little remote again and kept Ness's shoulder for himself. I angled the remote toward the corridor's pinhole and pressed. The bell on our shelf answered on a beat that belonged to no one in the room. Rosalind's eyes cut to the exit sign without meaning to. Kellen's jaw tightened into prayer. I shut the door. I dislike demonstrations, Wolfe said mildly, but some minds require a picture. He looked at Ness. Mr. Panzer will take you to remove everything you installed here and at Miss Kincaid's apartment, under Mr. Pike's supervision and Mr. Goodwin's eyes. You will list each intrusion. Then you will write the statement I described. The police will be called when it is finished. Ness looked at Margot again, but the room had stopped arranging itself for his benefit. He nodded. All right. Dennis, I said. Dennis unfolded from his watch like a bridge lowering for a ship. We'll leave the walls in one piece, he told nobody in particular, and followed Saul and Ness out. Havel, Wolfe said, you will prepare receipts for the removal and for the documents Father Kellen handled. Make duplicates. Havel had his pen ready before the sentence ended. Already begun. Miss Wa, Wolfe went on without moving. You will bring me your interval sheet at the close. It will be part of the record. You will not correct a single digit, even if tempted. Lucy smiled without humor. Temptation has not yet produced an error on my page. Miss Venner, Wolfe said, and let the name turn cool in his mouth. You will remain until Mr. Ness returns with a written confession. It is not a condition, it is courtesy. She was calculating what staying signaled and what leaving would concede. She stayed. Tollen checked his watch and decided that humility could be efficient. Kellen opened his folio, found nothing in it that improved his standing, and closed it again. For 20 minutes the office sounded like a building teaching itself to breathe. Through the door came the small noises of screws admitting guilt and wire retreating from bad ideas. Twice the bell gave a lonely, unprompted ding, the coil coughing as Dennis coaxed it away from the bracket, and Lucy wrote both down because that's who she was. Margot didn't sit. She stood at the corner of Wolfe's desk with her fingers gentle on the leather, as if testing it for truth. Wolfe watched the space a little to the left of her shoulder and, as always, missed nothing. Saul returned with Ness, who held a shoebox that now housed mischief, the lens, the wafer, 2 coils, a cheap transmitter with aspirations, and a roll of tape that smelled like epoxy's regret. Dennis carried a short length of wire like it was a snake he had killed in self-defense. Apartment's clean, Saul said. Silver's junction box has been laundered. Exit sign now indicates only exits. Ness set the box on Havel's cleared corner and took the chair Wolfe indicated that had no back and no dignity. He wrote, It didn't take long. Confession is short when you aren't clever enough to adorn it. He signed. Saul signed. I signed. Wolfe didn't. He accepts proofs, not invitations. Inspector Kramer, I asked. Presently, Wolfe said. Father Kellen will telephone the bishop first. Kellen's hand hovered over his pocket, then surrendered to gravity. Yes, he said. He made the call within earshot, because he knew better than to ask for privacy. He used the right nouns, responsibility, apology, retraction. He didn't attempt absolution. Wolfe had not offered liturgy. Rosalind typed a resignation on her phone with the grace of a woman who had done worse things for causes she liked less. She emailed the draft to Margot for approval, because the universe had tipped correctly for once. You'll add your language, she said tightly. I'll remove some of yours, Margot answered. Tolland set Monday at 10 with a soft sigh. The sound checks make when they leave pockets. I'd like the children's program named for my mother, he said, not as a bargain but as a legacy. which is what money hopes to buy when it stops pretending. That, Margot said, is something we can talk about when you aren't timing it for Friday. He took the hit with a nod that made me like him a centimeter. It's something. Kramer arrived like a weather front in a shabby topcoat with competence under it. He heard the story in 2 pages and 1 shoebox, scowled at the word apartment, and scowled again at wafer. He read Ness's confession, looked at Kellen as if considering whether sanctimony was a misdemeanor, and said he'd take the box and the bodies it pointed to. He gave Ness the kind of look that retires hobbies. He didn't thank Wolfe. The day that happens, I'll buy Times Square. When they'd gone, with Rosalind's draft in Margot's inbox and Tolland's Monday entrusted to Havel's calendar, the room dropped its shoulders. Dennis touched the empty bracket like a surgeon checking a healed scar. Lucy tore her last page free with the solemnity of a verdict and handed it to Wolfe. He glanced, grunted, and put it under his palm like a seal. The bell on the shelf sat there, finally what it had been, a decorative object without ambition. Wolfe glanced at it and then at Margot. "You will have quiet tonight," he said. "I'll take it," she said, "on lease." "Nothing is permanent," he allowed. "Not even indignation, but consequence can endure if one feeds it." We said our good nights like people leaving a theater after an ending they hadn't believed they'd get. I took Margot home. The cat met us, turned, and went to its business with the casual insolence of a creature restored to its kingdom. The thread at the buzzer plate was unbroken. At 3:17 the apartment did nothing at all, which is a sound some people live their lives to achieve. We stood and listened to the absence until it became simply the room again. Back on 35th, Fritz had kept a plate warm the way saints keep candles. Wolfe ate with the slow, sensuous approval of a man who believes in taste as theology. When he was ready, he spoke. "A whistle commands," he said, looking for a moment at the bronze on my desk, "and a bell convenes. Our offenders mistook the one for the other. They believe that to make a noise is to make a right. Pfui! Consent is the only tone that carries. The rest is racket." "That'll preach," I said, "even without a collar." He let the corners of his mouth consider the concept of a smile and dismiss it for being imprecise. "Miss Kincaid," he added, "will now manage patrons with fewer tutors and more allies." "Saul says Tolland's Monday is real," I reported. "Kramer parked Ness where he won't be improving anyone's doorbells, and Kellen's bishop is rewriting his notion of stewardship." "Good," Wolfe said, and pushed his plate away with the contentment of a field general who prefers roast to spoils. "The brownstone has been returned to order. So has the trust. That is sufficient." I poured us 2 fingers of something that's earned its label. Down the hall the orchids breathed like patient conspirators. Outside, the city practiced its own harmonies, not always pretty, but properly theirs. The office bell on my desk stayed put. If it rang, it would be because I asked, not because somebody with lemon oil and a theory thought it should. Monday's 10 o'clock didn't try to be a moment. It tried to be a meeting, which is how decent moments survive. The lobby had flowers that hadn't learned their donors' names yet. The press didn't arrive because they hadn't been invited. A staffer with a camera from the office supply store documented the kind of history that fits in a drawer. Tolland came on time and without weather. He shook Havel's hand as if a ledger could feel gratitude and handed over a check that would calm equipment and agitate committees. He asked gently about the children's program named for his mother. Margot said the trust would welcome the conversation at the next board meeting, recorded and minuted like grown-ups. He nodded, and for a second he looked like a man who had come very near to mistaking influence for legacy and was relieved to learn the distinction before a headline taught him. Father Kellen arrived with his apology letter and a face you could iron a shirt on. He didn't read the letter aloud because he had learned, temporarily, that some beaux don't want narration. The bishop had signed it. The phrasing had been filed down until it no longer cut on contact. The paragraph that mattered lived in the middle. The church apologizes for its presumption in matters outside its stewardship and for any intrusion upon private peace. It didn't sing, but it didn't wriggle. Kellen handed a second copy to Havel, who placed it where paper earns its keep. Then Kellen asked Lucy for a program for the children's concert and thanked her when she gave him one. Small, but civilization is built on small. Rosalind sent her resignation on letterhead that had enjoyed better days. She did not attend. Margot read the line where Rosalind praised steadfast stewardship in an unsteady city and permitted herself a breath. The board would fill the vacancy after some ceremonial mourning. In the meantime, no one mistook a calendar for a mirror. Peter Ness did penance the way men with talents but no ballast do. Too fast. Kramer didn't let him rush it. He signed where the signatures went and returned the last thing that wasn't his, the handbell, to Margot's dresser, supervised by Saul and a cat that had opinions about bailiffs. Then Kramer introduced him to a process that would keep his hands busy in public spaces for a while without offering him much to wire. Ness took it like a man who had spent a long time believing he was indispensable and was learning he was simply employed. By Thursday night, the hall was ready for the donors we could afford and the ones we couldn't. Alan had scissored his Benedictus down to a length that respected attention and adored itself in moderation. He played it with an expression that said he'd learned something about control and wanted credit for it, but he let the music speak first. Dennis stood at the back like a keel under a ship and watched the walls as if they might try another trick. Lucy ran the schedule with the quiet tyranny competence uses when it's fond of you. Her interval sheet was replaced by a run of show whose numbers obeyed without drama. Havel had a names list that promised the right applause in the right places. The bishop sat where he was put and didn't try to be a verb. They asked Wolfe and me to attend and call it goodwill. He sent me as a representative sample. I took a corner seat with a view of the exit sign that now did nothing but glow red like a conscience. Margot introduced the new season without theatrics, thanked donors without flirting, and took a beat before she said, "For the public harmonies, the way a person puts a hand on a banister that's been repaired and finds it sound." When the small carillon out back chimed, on purpose and on time, the room's shoulders went down an inch. Ritual had been returned to its owners. After, in her office, the shelf bell was quiet except when someone asked it to be otherwise for the old pleasure of a crisp note. Margot looked at it, then at me, and flicked it once with a forefinger. The ping landed and disappeared like a good decision. "You all right?" I asked. She considered that for real. "I'm tired," she said, "but the kind that sleeps." "Recommend it," I said. "It has a track record." She half smiled. "You and Mr. Wolfe won't object if I never become reasonable." "Not to any ring in the world," I said. "Make your own." She nodded, and that was that. I took the coat rack's old corner out of habit, no longer necessary, no longer in the way, and went home to tell the man who hates demonstrations that the demonstration had ended in a room full of listening. Fritz had rabbit with mustard because the calendar said it was time for forgiveness. Wolfe was at table with a book he had already won the argument with. I gave him the short version. Money without a banner, an apology letter that could look itself in the face, a program that landed, niches for humble names, an exit sign that indicated exits and nothing else. "Phooey," he said, but mild. "I do not dislike institutions when they remember their function. And when they forget, we remind them, quietly, if possible." He gestured at my chair. "Sit. Then tell me to whom I owe a final word." I took coffee in the chair and gave him names like stations on a line. He stopped me at Margot. "She will be well," he said, which is as close as he comes to benediction without paying royalties. Her grievance was not vanity, it was sovereignty. People forgive transgressions against comfort. They do not forgive theft of consent. What about Ness? I asked. He will be useful to Kramer for a time, then forgotten by people who deserve better hobbies, he said. He mistook means for ends. It is the disease of the mediocre clever. He will live. And Kellen? A man who adores obedience will always find a liturgy that praises him, Wolfe said. The church has survived worse than a minor zealot. Miss Kincaid has survived worse than a poor grammarian. He lifted his glass. Not to me, not to victory, but to whatever it is he salutes when he is pleased with the geometry of justice. I looked at the bronze hotel bell on my desk. It had behaved for days. On impulse, I tapped it with a finger. The note was clean. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. For Fritz, I said. Dessert convening. Do not cultivate the habit, he said, but the edge had no edge. The phone rang. It was Saul, who never calls just to waste his breath. Tolland was seen introducing his mother's name to a check without any reporter in the room, he said. Looked like he liked it. Venner's statement played like contrition if you squint. Kellen's bishop is busy with other harmonies. For the record, Miss Kincaid put the brass bell back on her dresser and slept through 3:17. Good, Wolfe said from his chair when I relayed it. That hour belongs to bakeries and cats. He went back to his book until Fritz arrived with something that required laying down arms, pears in syrup with a whisper of star anise. We addressed them with the proper solemnity. After, he pushed his plate away and leaned back, fingers tented, eyes in the middle distance where he keeps his judgments lined up like bottles. A bell, Archie, he said, is a civil arrangement. It proposes a gathering and assumes consent. The instant consent is removed, it ceases to be a bell and becomes a weapon, small but no less presumptuous than a cudgel. Our city is full of men who whistle and call it law. It will do if, from time to time, one reminds them that invitation is not command. Even if the invitation's loud, I said. Volume is not virtue, he said, and closed his eyes because he'd said enough. Pay Mr. Havel's invoice to us. Send Miss Kincaid my compliments. And, Archie, leave that bell alone for a week. I'll try, I said. I didn't, not entirely. When I went to bed, I tapped the bronze once for the pleasure of a clean sound in a clean room. It was an honest note in a house that kept its own time. The brown stone held still. The city outside made its argument and its apology like it always does. Somewhere on West 53rd, a shelf sat without a voice until Margot chose to lend it hers. I slept like a man who had spent a week listening and who had finally heard quiet choose him back.